Blog Talk Radio.
And welcome to another edition of Carnivore Radio. I'm your host, Chef Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. We have a special guest today, and she's been on the show a couple times, and last time was Time Does Fly about a year ago, Fran Keogh, and she's a life business coach, and her focus is on helping busy professionals build a better life, more time, more fun, more freedom. Dr. Lopkin, who could argue with that?
Nobody. We're good to have you here.
Good to
Fran,
be back.
welcome to Carnivore Radio. Yep, thank you so much for joining us. And time does fly. I know it's an overused axiom, but it is true. Almost a year ago, in kind of the height of the COVID pandemic, things seem to be easing. And why you're such an opportune guest is the fact that we talked about people kind of putting some, not all, of their dreams, maybe their business plans on hold for a while and what to do in that kind of a situation. So I think that you're seeing people trying to reignite their plans, correct?
Yes. It's a mix, actually. It's kind of an interesting... I'm glad you brought this subject up because there's an interesting dynamic I see going on.
Can you expand on that? What?
Sure.
What's this dynamic?
I was waiting for you to say something. Well, what I'm seeing, and of course I can't really call it a trend because I may be referring to only, some clients and some people in my circle. So maybe we're talking about a dozen people, but what I'm hearing and seeing is some really strong reassessment of what's important to them and some shifting.
Let's expand on that. I think that's a fascinating bit of information. That goes back, Dr. Lopkin, when we had our business show on terrestrial radio. That, to me, is where, again, I'm not the expert, but possibly where a lot of growth comes into play.
Yes. Yes. I first of all, I think what has to happen is acknowledgement. It's easy to try to be a sunny optimist and say, this is all going to pass and everything's going to work out. Yes, eventually everything finally works out to some degree or another, sooner or later.
One way or another, yeah.
One way or another, right. And I think it's important for us as individuals to, and maybe collectively, is to acknowledge our challenges and to say, this is tough. This has been really hard. And I'm seeing a few people who have done really well during this period because they were either in the right place at the right time with the right product, or they have taken advantage, and I mean that not in a negative way at all. They've analyzed the situation and they've seen what's needed. And then there's another group, another set of people who are plodding along trying to do the same thing and not recognizing that there needs to be a change because it's not going to be the same necessarily. There's a fine line between...
That to me is amazing and interesting. I'm sure our listener would find it fascinating that things are never going to be the same. The business plan of 2 years ago or the life plan is somewhat irrelevant at this point, isn't it, Fran?
I'll disagree mildly. I don't know that it's completely irrelevant, but
yeah, that's a little, yeah.
Yeah, I think it has to be re-examined. So the key is first, as I say, to acknowledge what's been going on and what's happening to you in your life and to say, this is tough, this is hard. And it's either going to take continuing on, and this is where I was starting to talk about the fine line between what is a sensible thing to keep doing the same thing and to be persistent and consistent and know that there's that exponential curve. And at what point do you say, okay, this isn't going to work anymore? But even there's a whole other layer below that. And this is what I was talking about at the very beginning here, was that people are reassessing what they're doing and what's important to them now. And so maybe somebody who was completely committed to the idea of a six-figure income is saying, you know what, I don't know that that's so important to me anymure, because values
and how
change.
has the pandemic influenced that? Because I think you're right. I've heard other pundits say and experts, allude to that. Again, you see that happening. Is it something that you think is pervasive or just an isolated situation? And what do you think's behind it?
I'm not sure about the first question. I can certainly help to answer the second. The first question, as I say, within my sphere, I'm seeing that and hearing that. So people that were really intent on building their own business are saying, you know what, I don't know if I need to make that much money anymore, because I just don't know that I want to put the effort and the hustle into it, because now I value my time with my family is more important. So
interesting. Dr. Lopkin?
Yeah. I mean, Fran's been saying, she's basing this on her sphere, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, that is an actual trend, because I've seen it in a lot of areas. People have been reassessing what's important to them, how they need to live their lives, and it's both good and bad, because as many people as I know that are saying, well, it's more important for me to spend time with family, and I don't want to spend all my time at the office anymore. I also know a whole lot of people who've said, you know what, I've spent enough time with my family, I'm getting divorced now.
there is that.
Well,
there is that side
Fran,
too.
before you go
right.
on, I think that might be, I know it was, it meant in a comical way, but is that not maybe true? There's some truth to that. Like, if you had, maybe it brought more relationships, family situations together, but then on the other hand, some possibly less than totally functional relationships ebbed as they, in a shorter period of time, given the pandemic, than they would have done, with more time given.
Yeah, I think it's shone a beam, as it were, and it's highlighted the flaws. So if a relationship is pretty solid and good, that's going to continue most likely. If there's some flaws in it, it's going to exacerbate the flaws. But I'm hearing a number of people who've been saying, I actually want to go back and work, maybe not full time, but I'd like to go back and actually work for an organization or have a job, while still
versus the entrepreneurial thing.
Yes, or they're combining the two.
Okay.
They reached that point where I just don't want the hassle, is what I'm hearing, and that's why I said I don't know if that's a trend, but I suspect if there's a dozen people in my sphere that I'm hearing that, then that has to be somewhat reflective of the whole, doesn't it?
Could it be maybe that the pandemic has highlighted the overall fragile element of life itself, that we're not here forever and you got to reassess? I have a friend that's worth several $1 million. He's retired now, and he actually has gone into a depression because, money is great. It really is great. And I'm not just saying that as, kind of giving it a short shift. It's hugely important. But if you don't have anything else in your life, it can be kind of a very scary. It's almost scarier than if you were just middle class or, had a comfortable savings, so on. But when you focused your whole life on something and then it becomes empty, that can be depressing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, like you said, not to diminish the importance of the flow of energy as in the form of money, but it's I had now I'm fully vaccinated. I was actually finally able to travel and go back to Baja, Mexico, and visit my granddaughter after a long period of absence. And I had the wonderful good fortune of meeting and hiking with a Buddhist monk from Bhutan, the happiest country in the world, apparently, still is, supposedly. And I was talking to him about that, and he said that there's no poverty, there's no homelessness, there's not a huge disparity between rich and poor. It sounds like a wonderfully socialist country, doesn't it? But
yeah, it does, doesn't it?
But they've also got all these mountains, and it's just beautiful, and most people are Buddhist. I'm sure it has, and he said it's probably about 50 years behind the rest of the world right now. So it'll take,
which isn't such a bad thing,
up.
to be honest with you.
well, right, but it's 50 years, so give it 50 years, and it may have caught up, unfortunately, in some of the not so great aspects. But and it was interesting talking and walking with him, because it's just a different perspective. And I'm not advocating one or the other, but I think there's a balance. But coming back to the original question about how do we get back onto our businesses and continuing, once you've made the decision to what you truly want, and you've assessed and you've made your decision of how you're going to progress forward, I mean, it can be so difficult to get re-energized and restarted, isn't it? I mean, for all of us, or most of us.
Dr. Lopkin?
So how we...
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to get re-energized. It takes an effort. But I think what Fran is seeing with these folks that, they've sort of decided they want to go back to working for someone else is, I think it's twofold. One, there's a responsibility being an entrepreneur. Your salary, your income depends on your work. You're responsible for any employees you may have, and it is a lot of pressure. And after the past year, I think people do want to get rid of some of that pressure. But secondly, being an entrepreneur, especially at the beginning of a venture, is an incredibly isolating thing. And going to a workplace and going to another job, there's a social aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So I think after the past year, people don't want to be isolated anymore. They're looking forward to actually being in contact with people.
Great point, Dr. Lopkin.
I completely agree, because that's what I'm hearing and seeing too, is that it has highlighted, so whereas you go to meetings and networking meetings and that sort of thing, it all went virtual, which some of that was great. You got to meet people that you would normally meet because all the meetings were virtual, right? But there's nothing quite the same energy or in the same room with somebody else. And I have friends who are introverted and have said, oh, this is a blessing for me. I love this. I don't have to go out and socialize. But then for the rest of most of us, it can be. It's doubly isolating because you don't have any work. You can't even go to your local coffee shop and sit and have, meetings or do some of your work because you can't sit there.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I mean, and there have been good points of it. I mean, I have been able to attend meetings all over the country that I would never have been able to get to before, and I've met folks internationally. But by the same token, I'm still sitting in front of a computer staring at a screen, and after a while, it's like, all right, I can't take another Zoom meeting. It's like I don't want to be in front of the computer anymore.
It's sort of Zoom exhaustion. I compare the difference between listening to your favorite band or orchestra on DVD or download or whatever. Not DVD. It could be DVD or television or whatever, and actually being there in concert. There's a completely different energy, and I think that's one of the things that's also been highlighted is that feeling of being disconnected. Some of the people that I've talked to though, have been saying this, that they're actually looking at going back to a job, or they've actually got a job but they're still continuing with their businesses, is that they recognize that they actually didn't need the kind of income because they were in a fortunate place, because maybe they had a spouse or a partner who was also contributing. So they didn't need to go back to that hassle. So they're taking a more relaxed approach, but they're continuing their work and getting income, creating income by working for a company, but maybe it's at a lower level, so they have time to still grow their businesses. Good. Which may or may not work.
That's a great point to pause on. We will be right back after this message.
To reach the next level, you need to operate at peak performance. The key to this is mastering the 7 elements of success. Learn how to master mindset, focus, operations, communications, innovation, evaluation metrics, and continuous improvement. Get the Biznetics way at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and bookstores near you.
And we're back. And remember, if you want to be part of the conversation, you can call us at 563-999-3693. That's 563-999-3693. So, yeah, you made a great point that people are reassessing what they need. And certainly after a year-long pandemic where people were isolated and, changing everything, some of those changes are still going to stick, while some of them are going to go back to where they were. Mm-hmm. And reevaluating, which you're going to do is important for people.
Right. And then to the original question, as far as how do we get back into that groove once we've determined which groove it's going to be? I think it's like anything. It's not going to just swing right back overnight. It's an incremental steps. And once you've really determined what your why and why you're doing what you're doing, how you're doing it, you just have to find the resilience and the determination to keep going. Don't necessarily wait for motivation, because motivation doesn't really work most of the time, because we don't always feel motivated. Do we always feel motivated to go and run or do our daily exercise or do those pieces of our business? No. But it's that sort of, but you still got to do it anyway. So you have to generate the energy from somewhere, whatever that is.
I would agree. I think
different
the
tools.
Nike tagline is very apropos. Just do it, because I do agree with what you're saying, Fran, that you can't wake up every morning and say, "Yeah, I'm just gonna make it happen." No, sometimes you got to force yourself, and it develops its own sense of energy, doesn't it? Just by taking the steps, even if you don't want to do that. I want to wax philosophically a little bit, because maybe we're at maybe there's some healthy aspects to this reassessment. And I think for the last 40 or 50 years, through the media, through entertainment, oftentimes they've downgraded the value, not all the times, I'm painting a broad brush, but individuality, success, independence, even, especially independent women, were really put on a pedestal. And I'm wondering if people aren't really reassessing, and basically in the end, isn't it all, you need to, believe me, you need to be financially stable. But in the end, how much is enough? And isn't it all about friends, family, and relationships? Because when you're, hopefully at a ripe old age, at 95 years old on your deathbed, you're not worried about your 401k. Right.
We touched on this actually in one of our other conversations, I remember. And I'm thinking about what is enough. And the other piece was individuality, and individualism is important, and I'm all about being an individual. But at the same time, there are moments when it's essential that we come together as a group because it's for the good of it, for the good of all. And I think this pandemic has highlighted that there, it's caused some obvious serious disagreements. But for me, it's all about, sometimes you just got to take one for the team. You got to do what's right for the whole. And so I think there's so many things that have been brought into focus because of COVID, and some are really good, and some not so.
Isn't that true? Just in everything, before we throw it out to Dr. Lopkin, is most of the growth, economic growth, most millionaires become millionaires or billionaires in recessions. Most people's greatest moments are sometimes their darkest. Obviously, you don't want to go through too many of those, but that's where the growth really happens. So this pandemic, as awful as it's been, maybe nothing's, not going to be Pollyannic, but I mean, maybe there's some real glimmers of growth coming out of this.
Oh, was that for me? Yeah. I was pausing to let. Okay. I have to believe that. I'm sure there are. I like that, Pollyannic. Is that actually a thing? Is that a word? I like it.
It's a real word, trust me.
Pollyannic, yeah.
Dr. Lopkin, what do you think of that?
Yes, I mean, we always see the biggest growth coming out of recessions, coming out of crises. But it is very important that we do reevaluate. And unfortunately, some of the people that need to reevaluate the most are failing to do so. I'm actually going to get a little political for just a moment, but here in the state of Connecticut, the state legislature has just pushed forward a whole bunch of bills that are the same types of bills that they pushed through at the end of the Great Recession that kept Connecticut as being one of the slowest growth states, one of the lowest moving forward. They held back the economy there, and now they're doing the exact same thing. They've failed to reevaluate and look at how we need to help everybody.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, politically, that reevaluation, introspection is not one of the salient attributes of most politicians. They're in it for themselves. So who knows what the real motivation is, correct, Dr. Lopkin?
That's true. I mean, in this case, most of the bills are brand new taxes, higher taxes, and this is not the time to be doing that when people are still trying to rebuild their businesses.
Yes, I would agree with that. So, Fran, someone that had a great plan, had a great idea, the pandemic put some of this on hold. And, to your point, which I think is extremely well-founded, you can't wait for that motivational bolt of lightning to hit you. How do you get back to it? A year's a long time to put something on hold if that is the case.
Well, hopefully you didn't put it on hold. Because there's no reason. But wasn't it tough to move forward during this? I mean, especially at the height of the pandemic. I mean, people were scared. Well, that is true. But that said, it depends what your business is. And there are some people that were able to. I think there was a little bit of, this isn't going to work. Nobody's spending any money, which is simply not true. There were people spending a lot of money, and there were some companies and businesses and individuals who've been doing really well. And, from a coaching perspective, there's certainly a lot of opportunity. There's even more opportunity out there in that respect in terms of trying to help people get through it, and work-life balance and all that sort of thing. It's a question of, it has a lot to do with what your business is and what your work is. Do you think maybe the pandemic could have been a shaking out process as well? Like the one, let's say it's of an existing business, smaller business. I'm not talking about Fortune 500, although that might be appropriate as well. The ones that survived and thrived, this period of pain will make them that much stronger. Let's look at a restaurant.
if you made it through the pandemic, you're in pretty good shape right now. You can make it through that.
I think
you're okay.
For me, the key, right? The key words, two words that have come up a lot for me in the last, maybe a year or longer, is resilience and reinvention. We grow stronger through challenges, and we don't grow when we're happy and things are just going along fine. We grow when we're having to do the tough work.
One thing. My observation's been that's where failure oftentimes, or going down the wrong road happens when things are all peachy and clean and everything's great. Mm-hmm. That's when sometimes those are the seeds of failure start to sprout. Yeah,
for on lots of different levels, work and personal life and so on and so forth. But so resilience is, I think, incredibly important in being able to survive and keep moving forward. And reinvention, looking at what makes sense anymore, not just doggedly doing the same thing because that's what you've always done. And it might be the best course. So that's not a generalization, but that's where the reevaluation comes in. And then once you've done that, you say, okay, got to get back to it. There's no happy fix. There's no pill that you can take that's going to make it work. It's just, we got to be tough.
Dr. Lopkin, good point.
Yeah, no, she's absolutely right. You have to be tough. You have to be resilient. You also have to be willing to adapt. I mean, I'll use my own business as an example. We had one division that did networking groups. Well, all of those networking groups had to move online, so it's much harder to make money off of a virtual networking group than it is one in person where you can charge admission. But by the same token, we were able to take the slower environment and use that. We have the Exvadio podcast network, which Carnivore Radio is part of. We were able to launch new podcasts. So where we had 3 podcasts at the beginning of the pandemic, we've got 6 now. We launched a print line of book publishing. So we were able to adapt to different things to take advantage of that slower work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly
great.
That. So those for me are the key pieces: is reevaluate, reassess, and then be resilient and just reinvent yourself if you need to.
Because that's interesting you say that,
change.
Fran. Because when Dr. Lopkin and I had a business show, and it was at the height of the recession. Real quick, is that one of the most dangerous things was the person that was in a job for 30 years, never got retrained, had laid off at 45. That was worse than someone that's had 2 or 3 experiences and has updated their skills. Mm-hmm. So you're right, doing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes it's comfortable, but in some ways dangerous. Dr. Lopkin?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are just about at the end of our time. So, Fran, if our listeners would like to get a hold of you to utilize your coaching services, how can they do that?
Fran at frankeogh.com, or reach me through Fran at frankeogh.com is my email, and then my website is frankeogh.com. So as long as you got
thanks
the
so much
spelling
for being
right.
on Carnivore Radio.
Thank you. It's been great talking, guys. All right. Have a good weekend.
You too. You've been listening to Carnivore Radio. You can catch us live every Friday at 4 at blogtalkradio.com/Carnivore Radio. You can catch the replay of this as well as the Carnivore Bites podcast on the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Radio, Stitcher, wherever you find podcasts. We'll see you next week.